there are certain things about React that actually make things easier than doing it the old way. We just manage our data, and we define how that data gets printed out on the page. And then we don't have to say when the data changes, redraw the page. If you add another thing to the list, well, gosh, you're going to have to make a new list item. You're going to have to insert it into the list, blah, blah, blah. Right? Declarative versus imperative. We're declarative now. It's a little easier than that. Changes to data or just changes to data? If we've already defined what happens to the data when it's there, piece of cake. So instead of just having some HTML in here for these 3 notes, let's see if we can make them render dynamically from something, anything. This is the way you would have done the little clickbait links at the bottom of Dwarf Underground if you did that with map. Who did it with map? Thank you, John. Go you. Bonus points. Hyperfighting. So in the note list right now, we just have these A's with LIs in them. And each of those seems to be a note with its own title and body. Now at the beginning we said that individual notes might be a pretty good opportunity for another component, right? I agree. So let's make a note component. New component, capital N, note.js. It doesn't need its own state. It's going to get its data from elsewhere. So I still need to import React from React. But then I just need a function called capital N note, const note equals arrow function. Before I forget, because I totally will, export default note. And what do I want to return? Something like this. One of these A's with an LI in it. So I just tell it, this is what a note looks like. So a note list, I can import note from note. And instead of all these things inside my UL, let's just put a note. Heck, let's put 2. Did it work? I should have 2 of the same note. Indeed. Easy enough? We don't want the data to be the same for every note, right? We want the title and the body to be dynamic. And the note component doesn't necessarily need to care what the origin of that data is. All it really needs to know is that data is coming from outside of itself. How do we get data from the outside into a component? It's a one-word answer. Props. Right? We have state and we have props. State is for managing the data internal to that component. Props is for passing data into the component, like arguments. Right? So a note list, and this isn't final code here. We're just going to try to wrap up note component before we start worrying about where exactly this data is coming from. But let's just make a local variable inside this NoteList function. called notes. And let's make one note. Let's just make one note. Const note equals this thing with an ID, maybe. A title. And a body. How do I get that note into my note component? Someone say that louder, whoever said that. This dot props. So that's how I get to it from this side, right? How do I pass it along here? So here's where we're rendering that component, right? Note. We'll take away the extra one. We'll just have to deal with one note for right this second. How do we get a prop into that note? What part of HTML's anatomy do props correspond with? Like our component is a tag name, right? An element. What's a prop? It is an argument, but what does it look like in the JSX? I know you know. Okay, go ahead. Mia, did you start to answer?
I think so. Isn't it like prop equals and then you insert?
So the name of the prop equals something, which looks like what part of HTML? Like my prop equals, say that again? Attribute, yeah. So they look like attributes. Like this is a prop. This isn't HTML. This is JSX. That's actually a prop. So to pass a prop into note, just the way that you pass an argument to a function, you write it like an HTML attribute. And let's call it note. Don't need to get clever. And you can assign them strings, but if you want to assign them JavaScript, you use curly braces instead of quotes. And what do we want to pass in there? Yeah, this note variable right here. That's how we pass the prop into the note component. Just like passing an argument to a function. Yep. Note, note, note. So on the other side, how do we get to those props? Somebody said it earlier. This dot props. And that is how you do it if it is a class. There's nothing automatically assigning that here because we're not using components constructor. This is just a function. So what did we say props are like? Chris, you said it earlier. Arguments. If you're dealing with a stateless functional component where the entire component is a function, your props are literally an argument. So just give them a name in your argument list, and you can get to them. So now it's not this dot props, it's just props. So for the note title, what could I put here? So here's what our note looked like. So props would be all of our props. The specific prop we want is props dot note, and within that, dot title. So to spit out some JavaScript here, curly braces, props, dot note, dot title. And down here, of course, props, dot note, dot body. Need to wrap that in curly braces. Oops. Did it work? My fancy note, oh so fancy I do declare. Yep. We did it. Passing in props, like arguments. Literally arguments if it's stateless functional. So what if instead of one note, I'll make a tiny little commit, why not? Dynamically render one note from a variable.